Hello, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast. OSHA-Compliant Flame-Resistant Workwear. Are you outfitting your workers correctly? Sponsored by Dickies. My name is Kyle Morrison. I'm the Senior Associate Editor with Safety and Health magazine, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us. We'll start the presentation in a few minutes, but first I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. The views of the speakers and their organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the Council or the magazine endorse them. At the end of today's webcast, we'll have a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply type it in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and then click the Submit Question button. Feel free to ask your question at any point during the presentation. You don't have to wait to the Q&A session to begin to ask your question. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can, but due to the large number of participants today, not all of the questions may be answered. However, any unanswered question will be forwarded on to today's speakers. For basic troubleshooting information, please click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete an evaluation survey, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived for 3 months, so you can access it after today's live presentation. Within about a day, just use the same URL to return to the webcast. With that, I think we're ready to begin. We have 2 speakers today. Ed Folk is the former OSHA administrator. Currently, he is Dickies FR spokesperson and a partner with Fisher & Phillips LLP, a leading national labor and employment law firm. Mark Sainer is the technical manager for WorkRight Uniform Company and has more than 35 years' experience in the fire and safety industry. Mark?
Yes, we're ready to go. Okay, some of the things we're going to learn about today are the different hazards, flash fires, electric arc, small molten metal splatter. We'll talk a little bit about how to remain OSHA compliant, and then we'll get into some of the FR clothing, how it helps protect workers to meet those OSHA requirements, and that's where Ed will get in and give us some insights on that. So first, let's talk a little bit about some of the basics, the FR 101, protecting employees, what FR is all about. First, I'm going to talk about what is FR clothing and why is it important. FR fabrics, they basically don't ignite and continue to burn. They can also provide some escape time from a flash fire. After the initial flash fire explosion is done, there may be residual fire and heat and thermal events that you need to get away from, and this gives you some added time to do that. A key thing to remember is that FR clothing minimizes burn injury. It doesn't prevent it, it minimizes it. And by doing so, that increases the chances of survival. If you look at the chart to the right there, you'll see some data, burn survival rate data that's been developed by the American Burn Association. And as you look up the left-hand side, and that's the percent of chances of survival. The blue column indicates a 25% body burn, 25% of an individual's body burn. And you can see that the survival rate is very high, 90+%. Now, and that's at all age groups. If you go to 50% body burn, the purple column, you can see that drops down some, but even at the older age group, you're still about a 50-50 chance of survival, and the younger groups are better than that. But once you get below that 50% number, or above that 50% number, and you approach, as in this example in the yellow bar, 75%, you can see that the survival rate starts to drop pretty quickly, particularly for the older groups. Only the 20 to 29-year-olds is above 50% chance of survival. So minimizing the amount of burn injury percentage on the body is critical for survival. And then another factor that comes into play is trying to address OSHA citations. By having the protective clothing on, that minimizes the potential that OSHA is going to have an issue with your protective clothing programs for your employees. Other things to keep in mind, most severe injuries, burn injuries, are caused by the clothing igniting, not the original hazard itself. So, for example, if you're in a flash fire scenario the flash fire is over relatively quickly and you're going to have some burn injuries, but once it's over, that thermal energy has gone. If your clothes catch on fire, you not only have the initial thermal, but you also then have that continuous burning. All that energy of your clothing that's burning is generating through the clothing onto your skin, and that's going to increase that percent body burn significantly. So you want to make sure that your clothes don't ignite and catch on fire. If you had nothing on the, or if you had, say for example, tank top on, which wouldn't be allowed, but if you had a small shirt on, where the tank top was burning would be much more severely burned than the exposed skin itself. So having nothing on would be better than having clothes on that's going to burn. And the cost of these injuries can be very expensive. They can exceed the cost of an entire FR clothing program just because of the expense in trying to rehab, which is also very lengthy and very painful. You don't want any of your employees to have to go through something like that. So, you know, you don't want your clothes to burn. You don't want them to catch on fire, because it's going to be, you know, it's a very devastating type situation. It's very painful, very long rehab, very costly, and something that can be avoided or at least minimized by wearing FR clothing. And what are the hazards that we're talking about that we're trying to protect against? There's three primary ones that FR clothing are used to protect against. The first one being flash fires, second being electric arc flash, and the third being the small molten metal splatter that can be coming from things like welding. So those are the primary ones that we're going to talk about today. And when you look at those three, the flash fire, electric arc flash, and molten metal, there are typical industries and workers within those industries that need FR protection, need some kind of FR clothing, FR garment to try and protect them. When you look at the flash fire type potential hazards, you're talking about industries like the petroleum refining industries, all the refineries in the different parts of the country. Chemical processing plants have the potential for flammable gases, flammable vapors that can ignite and create a gas cloud and a potential for a flash fire. We've got oil and gas drilling, all those drilling operations that are taking place throughout the country, in the Dakotas, through the shale areas in Pennsylvania. All those have recently been determined that they also need to be in FR for protection, because they can hit gas pockets that can explode. They have potential for flammable gases, flammable vapors that can ignite. You've got gas utilities and the contractors that work for the gas utilities, which is pretty obvious. You've got the gas which will burn. There's also combustible dust. It's not always well known, but there are certain dusts that can, when are in a small enough particle size and get lofted into the air near an ignition source, they can create a flash type fire explosion, whether it be wood dust or coal dust, plastic dust. Some metal dust will explode. You've got agriculture dust, sugars, flours, grains, those types of things. So there's a whole industry in the manufacturing where combustible dust can be generated that has the potential for flash fires and may need protection. And then there's also university labs. You've got these large research labs that work around flammable chemicals all the time, and if there's an accident, there's some exposure in the flammable vapors or gases ignite, the lab workers need something that's going to protect them. The second hazard category is the electric arc flash. So that's obviously electric utilities. They have need for arc flash protection. And then you've got the manufacturing electrical workers within the plants that generate high voltage electrical systems that need protection against arc flash. And then lastly, you've got the molten metal, welders, maintenance workers, and your electricians that may be working around electrical panels that could have molten metal from the exposure of the conductors that melt during an arc flash explosion.
And I guess, Mark, also the steel industry might be covered in that?
To some degree, there's two different pieces in the steel industry. There's the molten lava metal, so to speak, being poured out, and there's the sparks and splatter that comes off during the operation. So this would cover the typical FR clothing would cover the sparks and splatter. there's more of a specialized FR garment for the actual molten metal itself. So you're right, that potential's out there, and there's a couple different types of specialized garments that are used in that industry. Good point.
Yeah.
So those are some of the kind of the basics. It minimizes the burn injury. It protects the workers from several different types of hazards, and you're really trying to keep that body burn percentage low to increase the chance of survivability. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Ed, and he's going to get into some of the OSHA regulations and standards.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mark. And I do want to say thank you for all the attendees today. I deeply appreciate y'all's commitment to safety and health. Obviously, this is an extremely important area for safety and health because of the seriousness of the potential injury, as well as the potential for a resulting fatality for not having the right proper PPE here, and particularly dealing with flame retardant clothing. This slide the reason we included this slide, and I just wanted, because a lot of people think, well, I just got to comply with the OSHA standards and that's it, and I don't have to worry about anything else. Well, that's you definitely have to comply with the OSHA standards. There's no doubt about that. But we have other different standards here. Or actually, I guess consensus standards is probably a better way to discuss them there, put out by the NFPA and the ASTM that are utilized somewhat by OSHA, because particularly the NFPA, OSHA has adopted by reference a number of consensus standards put out by NFPA, and they have the force of the same as a standard, and when they're utilizing them, probably more so in the general duty clause, and we'll talk about the general duty clause in just a second. But also wanted to point out the fact that these not only if you violate a OSHA standard, but if you violate a consensus standard put out by these different groups, these different trade associations or bigger consensus groups, that could potentially open up potential legal liability to you for not meeting those particular requirements. And I guess we'll just go ahead to the next slide just to kind of discuss that here. And basically what we got here is I kind of want to talk about the two different types of potential where you have liability from an OSHA standpoint. The first one we're going to talk about is what they call the general duty clause, and hopefully a lot of you will be aware of the general duty clause. When the act was promulgated or passed in 1970, and it kind of came to be official in 1971, the Congress recognized that that OSHA was not going to be able to promulgate actual safety and health standards for every specific safety and health hazard in the workplace. They just recognized that it would be just overwhelming. I mean, we already have a lot of standards out there, safety and health standards, 1910 being the general industry standard, 1926 being the construction standard. So, and there's a couple others dealing with maritime, shipbuilding, stuff like that. But so they included in this act under Section 5A1 of the act this general duty that employers are required to provide a workplace that is free from recognized hazards that could cause death or serious injury. And so we need to be aware of that. And one of the things that they're going to be looking at when you're talking about the general duty clause, and does this actually how this ties in? It could be that there's certain things that there may be certain safety and health hazards, but more likely safety hazards that may be in your work site that there is no OSHA standard for. And so they're going to be looking to see how they can establish and be able to establish a violation under the general duty clause. You have to show that the employer had that this was a recognized hazard. Now, was it recognized by the employer or was it recognized by the union? And that's how those consensus standards that we were talking about in the slide previously really tie into that, because OSHA can point to those. And if you go to 1910.06, or .6, I guess it is, you're going to see all the consensus standards that have been incorporated by reference by OSHA into the Act and in their standards. So even if there is a specific standard, they can still go and point out that these different consensus standards that require employers to do certain things are going to be applicable to issues that may be arising, or violations or safety hazards that may arise in the workplace. And therefore, you need to recognize that. We just can't say, well, I meet this OSHA standards, I don't have to worry about anything else, because they are there. And of course, those standards, those consensus standards, also, in addition to potential liability under OSHA, you have the potential for legal liability under tort law, and we'll discuss that. I'll discuss that at the end of my talk here. But I did want to kind of first start off by just pointing this out about the general duty clause. And all right, and we go into, and like I say, the Act requires. The Act also requires that all employers comply with every safety and health standard that has been promulgated by OSHA that is applicable to their particular work site or their particular workplace. So obviously on this picture we got a little bit of a fall hazard, I would guess, and maybe a lack of fall protection here. But I think this was one of the ones that when they were building the Empire State Building. There were a number of pictures of when they were building the Empire State Building. How employees would have their lunch and stuff like that. So, but we need to recognize that that we're required to follow all the OSHA standards. And probably getting familiar with standards, I want to really focus on OSHA's Personal Protective Equipment Standard, the PPE Standard. And this is the general standard, 1910-132. There's also other PPE standards involving respirators, involving hand protection, foot protection, head protection. So, but this is the general one, and to be quite frank, this is the one that's going to be probably most applicable with respect to your requirements for utilizing flame retardant clothing in your particular operation. So, but we just need to be aware. I wanted to kind of go through some of the provisions of 1910-132 to show how PPE is required. And the responsibilities, and I'll tell you this right now, I am seeing a dramatic increase in the number of OSHA citations that my clients are getting for PPE. OSHA kind of figured this out. I talk about what is the low-hanging fruit. I actually have a list that I put together, 25 low-hanging fruits of what OSHA can. Well, I can know that I can go into most plants and find these violations. And 3 of them involve PPE, and so that's why it's very much that we need to be aware of these type of things, because we're going to find out that a lot of employers aren't doing those things and don't have the documentation and haven't done the things that are required under the PPE standard. And OSHA's figured this out, and so they're citing those employers for those violations. So let's go to the next one here. I'm really talking. This is kind of the first one, and I'm really going to be in subpart D. That's really kind of the subpart. Some of the others is kind of a little bit more, but this is the one that really focuses it. But very first thing you need to know, and you need to check to see if you've done this, because these apply to everybody. There's no exception here. I mean, unless you fall outside, if you got one employee under the Act, you're covered. Now, if you're a family farm, you got exempted. And there's a couple other things that are exempted. But for the most part, pretty much 99.9% of the employers and employees in the United States are covered under OSHA. So we need to add up right up front. But anyway, 1910 D1 of the Personal Protective Equipment Standard says that you are required to assess the workplace and determine what or if there are any safety or health hazards that are present or likely to be present, which necessitates the use of personal protective equipment. So you're supposed to be have done. This is a continuing duty, but you should have already done a workplace assessment as to what safety and health hazards there that necessitates the use of PPE. I will tell you right now that probably 50% of the employers in the United States do not do that top one. And then under to subpart 2, you're also required to do D1 parts I, double I, and triple I. That if you identify that the employee that you do have safety and health hazards that necessitates the use of PPE, i.e., some of the things that Mark talked about, needing flame retardant clothing, then you're required to select that personal protective equipment that is appropriate to meet the hazard. That's your responsibility. Then you have to advise and have the affected parties use that equipment, and then you have to communicate to the employees what the PPE that we have to protect them from these hazards, and and ensure that the selected PPE properly fits each employee. Now, the last part is,
And one of the things that I run into a lot that is interesting is employers think, okay, I buy products that meets one of the consensus standards, one of the NFPA standards, and they say, okay, that's got me covered. And I tell them, if they haven't done their hazard assessment, they still have some potential issues with OSHA, because you got to do the hazard assessment. You got to have both pieces, not just the clothing or not just the hazard assessment. You have to have both pieces.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right, because if you've not done the hazard assessment, you have violated subpart D1. And like I said, 50% of the employers probably have not done this. And yet you say, well, geez, all these companies I go to, they got their PPE here. They're wearing their flame retardant clothing, or they've got their safety glasses or ear plugs, or they got their steel-toed shoes. And the question is, and I have clients that have done this, and I've asked them the question, so why you've been using steel-toed shoes for a long, long time? Why do you have it? And the answer is, well, we just thought it was a good idea. Well, that's not going to, and did you ever do any assessment of the work site to determine what was the really appropriate ones? No, we just thought it was a good idea or something. We thought we should have that. And that's going to be identified, and then once again, if you haven't selected the right PPE, and you got to be able to justify it, on the earplugs, you're supposed to have multiple types of earplugs for people, a variety of earplugs, and if you have just one, even though it works, and maybe all the employees like it, but you're still in violation of the standard. So we need to be just a little bit smarter. And unfortunately, OSHA's citing employers for these things. Now and they're listing them as serious. Now then, maybe it's a couple $1,000, but how many earplugs or safety glasses or even flame retardant clothing can you pay for a couple $1,000? Well, you can pay a lot, or you can purchase a lot. And then you got to make sure that it fits the employees. Most employers they provide it. Some do a little fit testing. I mean, if you're using respirators, the standard specifically requires that and says that. But a lot of on the other stuff, most employers don't really focus on that. So I just want to point that one out too. The next one is subpart D, and this is extremely important. And I recommend that you all check to make sure at each one of your facilities. And this is a facility-by-facility thing. This is not a corporate. We're just doing one, and we're doing a corporate-wide, and we assume everybody's pretty much the same. You're supposed to do the assessment for your facility. And then, under D2, you're required to do a written certification that talks about what work site was evaluated, who was the person that did it, and the dates it was performed. And in fact, that's the particular standard of the PPE standard. They're part of that particular the PPE standard. Specifically says at the page has to say written certification of hazard assessment. You don't have to technically. You don't have to have a written hazard assessment, but you better sure have a written certification that has that little phrase at the top, or you're going to get a citation. And you know why they're doing that? It's because once again, I can tell you right now, 70% of the companies in the United States do have that. And OSHA figured that one out too, and so they're out there looking for those things because it's easy citations. They can hear, they don't do the certification. We'll make it other than serious since it's just a document. It's a document requirement, but we'll just put about a $3,000 penalty. Well, so you get it for $3,000 for not having a piece of paper. So you need to make sure you have those things because, like I said, I would guess based on my experience, I've been doing this since 1980, that I would say 70% of the companies in the United States don't do that. All right, we'll keep moving here. F1 requires that we train our employees specifically, we have to make sure that they are trained on what and when PPE is necessary, how to properly wear and adjust it, what are the limitations of the PPE, and how to properly care, maintain, and dispose of the PPE. Once again, I would say a lot of companies do training on PPE. It's a general thing. Oh, you got to wear your safety glasses, your earplugs, your flame retardant clothing, and your safety shoes. And that's what you see in the training program on orientation, or maybe once a year they do the follow-up training on that. But it doesn't go into this detail, which you're required to do. Once again, the reason I put this in is because these are what I'm seeing cited by OSHA, employers getting cited for these things. Once again, they may only do it, they may do an other than serious, or maybe they may do a serious one and say because you're not trained, they may not use it properly, therefore they could get seriously injured or killed, particularly when we're talking about flame retardant clothing. And then hit us for another $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. I mean, the maximum for a serious or other than serious is $7,000. But still, we're talking about real money. And once again, I'm saying 75% of the companies haven't done this detailed in training to meet those four different things that you are required to do, specifically required to do under the standards. So we need to be looking back. You need to go back and look at this stuff. We can correct this stuff pretty quickly, but we need to look and see what it is, make sure so we're in full compliance if OSHA comes in the door. And I tell my clients, I do hundreds of inspections a year, probably over 100 a year. I've handled 300 OSHA fatality investigations since I've been practicing. So I deal with these things. So if we can get this stuff in place, then we're going to protect ourselves and we're not going to have to worry about this. The next one is payment for PPE, and this was when I was assistant secretary. This was one of the things that I signed off on, and I worked with OSHA on trying to develop kind of a balancing act here as to what employers should pay for. And to tell you the truth, there was a whole series of there was a lot of confusion as to did the employees have to pay for PPE or did the employers have to pay PPE? And a lot of employers say, well, it's not my responsibility. It doesn't say it so in the Act or in the PPE Standard, so I'm going to just let my employees. And a lot of them couldn't afford even some of the stuff. Some of the stuff, obviously earplugs aren't things, but if you're wearing earmuffs, now we're talking some money. But anyway, so now this was, and I signed the final rule on this there, is that you have to pay, most employers have to pay for PPE that is required for their employees, as you determine from the hazard assessment, at no cost. But there are limited circumstances. We're going to talk about that. But I did make sure that the second section was put in here, H5, which requires employers to pay for replacement PPE, except when the employee has lost the PPE or has intentionally damaged it. So all PPE has a shelf life, and so if employees are coming to you and saying, well, you gave me this whatever, a couple of weeks ago, and we're saying, well, yeah, but it's supposed to last 6 months, and now you come back and say you want us to replace it after 2 weeks. Obviously you intentionally damaged it, and we're not going to pay. So you do have that provision there, and you need to be aware. But for most of the time, you're going to have to pay for employees' PPE. We don't have to pay for non-specialty safety-toed protective wear, logging boots, items used solely for protection in the weather. This is sunscreen. These are parkas that, if people work outside in cold weather, that's not a thing. Now, there is a little distinction now. If your employees are working in refrigerated areas or freezer areas, then I'm saying that's more likely going to be that's their work environment as opposed to just working outside. So, but anyway, these are things you don't have to pay for. Steel-toed shoes, basically, that's the main thing, really. So,
one other thing, Ed, on that I think is worth noting. If they're in an environment where FR clothing is required, say like in the drilling industry, and they're outdoors and they're in North Dakota,
right, and
they have to put on a insulated partner, well, the outer layer has to be FR, and so that would, I think, fall into the category of that's a PPE layer that's required to do the job.
Right, as opposed to protecting them against the cold.
Correct.
Yeah, so I would agree, yes, I would say that's great. So. All right, so the next one, and I'll just take just a few minutes because I wanted to make sure that we looked at the potential liability. I mean, obviously you have the OSHA liability. If you don't do those standards, if you don't meet those standards on PPE, you're going to get cited for them. Now, whether it's a serious, other than serious, or maybe even a willful. I mean, if you intentionally know that you're supposed to be providing some particular PPE, and you just say, no, that's too expensive, I'm not going to provide it. Well, now you're talking about being willful. Now we're talking about a $70,000 violation. And if they really think that you just intentionally did all this stuff and you knew what you had to do, you didn't provide the flame retardant clothing to people that you determined needed to utilize it, you just felt you weren't going to do it, or you weren't going to pay for it or whatever, then they may consider that to be willful egregious. And instead of grouping all the employees that didn't get the flame retardant clothing, let's just say there's 10 employees and say well, I know we said in our assessment they needed to have it, but we're not. I'm not going. I don't care. We're not going to give it to them. Then it could be considered willful egregious. Under a willful standard, that would be cited, and maybe the maximum penalty would be $70,000. Now, if they say if it's willful egregious, there's no grouping, so that for each employee that you didn't provide that or didn't do the training or whatever it is, you may get cited for that individually. So now you have 10 times $70,000 or $700,000. So now we're talking a really expensive money. So we need to be aware of that. And then also we need to be aware of, of course you got the workers' comp, and I probably should have put that on the slide there, because it is important. You got to realize that once again, here if you're getting a willful violation, or even a grievance violation, but if you're getting a willful violation under the workers' comp statutes, some states allow employees that are injured to get outside of workers' comp to be included in tort liability. So you get the sue in tort. The workers' comp statute was made basically to give. It was a trade-off between employers and employees. For the employer, it meant under workers' comp that the liability, the amount that the company was going to have to pay for a particular injury, was going to be a set amount, and it was going to be limited. It wasn't going to be millions and millions of dollars. For the employee or the worker there, the trade-off was, okay, yeah, you don't get these you don't get millions and millions of dollars, but you're going to get your money right away. You're going to be protected. You're going to be taken care of right away, and that was kind of it was a decision by all states throughout the country that we want to balance these up. We don't want people that get injured not to have ways to have money and not be able to take care of themselves, and so that's what the system. However, there are states that if you can show that can get around workers' comp by showing willful conduct or gross negligence, and even in some states that don't even allow that. There's judges that are going. I got a case right now in Georgia where a client, that is clear a workers' comp case, and now the judge says, well, this is a fact decision. We'll just let the jury decide if this is a workers' comp claim. Well, guess who you think that? But anyway, so now if you're able to sue, instead of maybe receiving a $50,000 or $100,000 in benefits or whatever, or payments from under workers' comp, now you as the employer, for violation of these standards, may be then looking at multi-million-dollar penalties under tort litigation, and that's where the civil litigation comes in. It gets outside of workers' comp, and now you're being sued by the plaintiff's lawyers because you're an uncaring employer. And they're using. And let me tell you something. The trial lawyers. If you go out there, you're going to see. If you ever went to a trial lawyers conference, you would be really interested to see. You can see where they're focusing on. And some of the courses they're teaching is here's how you file a Freedom of Information Act request to OSHA or any government agency, and get the files the investigative files that you can use and let OSHA do all your work for you, and then you can come back and then sue the company in tort. And of course, if someone gets seriously injured or killed, then there's always the potential for a criminal violation. Now, for OSHA to have a violation, a criminal charge sent to the Department of Justice, you have to have a willful violation of an OSHA standard that results in a fatality. That's the test. And OSHA only transfers about 3 or 4 cases a year to the Justice Department for review, and half the time they don't take any of them. But the big thing, the potential liability for criminal liability, is under either from a state attorney general or a local district attorney who says, oh, this is a case that's got a lot of publicity, we need to go there. So we need to be aware that there's all this potential liability, and in a particular case here, can you imagine if you're not using flame retardant clothing or the proper flame retardant clothing and somebody gets really seriously injured and then dies? How this is going to play in the media, and then all of a sudden the district attorney says, well, geez, I'm thinking about being the attorney general, or maybe running for governor one day, and this would get my name out there a lot. So you got to be a little bit aware of all these things here, because unfortunately it does happen. All right, I think we're going back to Mark here.
Yep, I'll take it from here. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about some of the consensus standards that Ed was referring to. The first one I'm going to discuss falls under the flash fire category, and this is an NFPA standard that's widely known and used in those industries where flash fires are a potential hazard, and that is NFPA 2112. This is the standard that sets the minimum performance requirements for the flame-resistant garments and the fabrics and the components that are used in the flame-resistant garments. Those minimum standards are all listed in there, or minimum requirements are listed, and they have test methods on how to determine whether the products in fact meet that minimum requirement. The two most obvious ones are the ASTM D6413, which is an ASTM test method for flammability of a fabric. They call it the vertical flame test. And the requirement to meet NFPA 2112 for this test is that the fabric has no more than a 4-inch char length and a 2-second after flame. And that's done on a garment or a fabric that's been washed 100 industrial launderings. So it's had a lot of potential time to, if it's going to be a problem, it'll show up after that laundering. So it has to meet that vertical flammability requirement. And then the second most obvious one or common one is the F1930 test, which is the mannequin test. This is an instrumented mannequin that's subjected to flame and heat on a standardized coverall, and calculates how much body burn percentage is estimated or predicted in that scenario, and it has to be a maximum of 50%. You can see how that ties back into the American Burn Association chart earlier, that 50% number. You're looking at body burn percentage, and we want to keep it below that 50% number. So that's your basic flash fires, the NFPA 2112. Now when we look at electric arc flash, there's a standard that covers all the maintenance and electrical workers inside manufacturing facilities, and that's NFPA 70E. This is the standard that specifies requirements for workplace electrical safety when folks are working on the energized electrical components and equipment. In 70E, it requires you do a hazard assessment, just like OSHA requires, so you can determine what are the potential arc flash exposures and what level and what rating do your protective clothing, what arc ratings do they have to have in order to be suitable for that particular task. In that 70, it refers to an ASTM standard, which is F1506. And then that standard has all the specific minimum performance requirements and specifications for the clothing. It lays out all the details on what the requirements are. The two most prominent ones in there are the flammability testing, just like the other requirement in the flash fire. It's the same D6413 test method. The only difference is for this particular standard, you have a 6-inch char length maximum and the same 2-second after flame. And then the other test and specification requirement is that all the garments need to have an arc rating. And to determine that arc rating, you use the ASTM F1959 test method, which exposes fabrics to actual arc energies at different levels to determine what the arc rating is. And the arc rating is determined by that point where there's a 50% probability that you're going to have a 2nd or 3rd degree burn based on that energy heat flux exposure from that level of arc flash. So again, we get back to that 50% number. You'll see that throughout the various standards and test methods. So that's the one for the electric arc for electricians. There's a whole separate standard for utility workers. OSHA has a standard, and the National Electrical Safety Code also has their requirements. But they all tend to point back towards this ASTM F1506, which lays out the requirements, including flammability and the arc rating, or the ATPV, arc thermal performance value. And the last one deals with molten metal. There's an ANSI standard. It doesn't get into as much detail as those other standards do. It talks about providing protective clothing. They want the people doing welding that are going to have protection from fabric ignition. They don't want burn injuries, trapping sparks in pockets, those kinds of things. And it talks in the annex about wearing heavier materials, heavy cotton, woolen clothing. Those have typically been fairly good against protection from the sparks, although more and more people are moving into flame-resistant garments because they know that's going to really cut down on the potential for igniting clothing. And it does make, also in that standard, it makes reference to other requirements such as gloves and aprons, leggings, sleeves, capes, those types of things. So it gets into what to wear, but it doesn't get into a lot of the details like the other two standards. But it does have some basic guidelines that people in those industries need to follow. So with those three standards referenced, the 2112 for flash fire, the 70E for the inside the plant electrical workers, and the ANSI standard for the welding, I want to talk a little bit about the protective clothing itself. There's two different basic categories that people refer to in the industry of the flame-resistant fabrics. One being inherent FR that people talk about, and the other being treated FR. The inherent FR fabrics are those that the fiber themselves have been structured, and the chemistry or the chemical structure of the fiber itself is not flammable. Those would be your aramids, some of the monocrylics, those kind of things. And that the flame-resistant properties, because it's inherent in the fibers, can't be washed or worn away. So no matter how many times you wash it or how badly it's worn, the flame-resistant properties are still intact. Now the garment itself may be in trouble and may be worn out, but it still won't ignite and burn. The other category are those that are treated to be FR, and this is where you take a fabric that is basically flammable, either 100% cotton or cotton nylon blend, those types of fabrics, and you apply chemistry, flame retardant chemistry, to make them flame resistant. So the way those work is when those are exposed to the heat and flames, they tend to char, and they tend to release some, have some off gases that scavenge the oxygen, dilute the flammable gases that are coming off the burning to self-extinguish. So they tend to self-extinguish very quickly after exposure versus the Inherence. They don't ignite in the first place. So those are the two different technologies that are used in flame-resistant fabrics, and both of those are used widely and are very suitable for the applications. So when we look at the Dickies FR line, which is an option, a good option that people can look at, what I wanted to have you take away from this is several things. One is the protection level. Most of the garments in the Dickies FR line are designed to be NFPA 2112 compliant as well as ARC compliant, so they can cover both ranges. Many of them are certified to the NFPA 2112, and all of them have the ARC ratings. And all the fabrics that are used in the Dickies FR line are guaranteed for the life of the garment. So can't wash out, isn't going to wear out. The garment's going to wear out before the flame resistance wears out on the garment. And they go through all the construction requirements in the standards. They're using high quality materials, whether it be the fabrics, the threads, the buttons, the zipper, all are premium high quality fabrics, so you get that protection. You don't have to worry about the garment protecting. And also involved or included with the Dickies FR line is the comfort factor, because that's very important. If the garment isn't comfortable, people aren't going to wear it. So all the garments have been developed with mobility in mind, so you don't have binding and tugging on it when you're trying to do your job. The fabrics are soft, they fit, they have good performance, And then they're also extremely competitive in the price. And part of that price has to do with how long they're going to last. The longer they last, the more overall value you get in the long term for the product. Some other things to note is the Dickies line is part of the Williamson-Dickie company, which has a satisfaction guarantee policy. As we mentioned, the garments are going to maintain their properties long-term, wash after wash. And Dickies is part of the WorkRight Uniform assortment. WorkRight Uniform is an affiliate of Dickies. It's been a leading B2B provider of FR clothing for over 40 years. Lots of experience, know what the market needs, know how to make a flame-resistant garment. That's all that we at WorkRight do. So that's the Dickies FR line is part of one of the brands of the WorkRight Uniform company. And within the line, you've got lots of options. You've got jeans, pants, coveralls. You've got multiple types of shirts, jackets, insulated outerwear, pretty much everything that's needed in the FR world. If you need something in the way of FR clothing, you can find it in the Dickies FR line. So there's lots of ways you can go find out about it. There's a website, whether it's either the Dickies or the WorkRight line. The Dickies also sells it through some of the retail channels, through distribution. So lots of ways you can get access to the Dickies FR line. So that kind of wraps us up. We talked about what the value of flame-resistant clothing is. Ed got into a lot of detail about OSHA and what OSHA requirements are. And then we also talked about the standards in the Dickies FR line. So at this point, we're going to try and answer any questions that might have come in and see if we can help you further.
Great. Thank you both, Ed and Mark. That was a wonderful presentation. Before we start the Q&A, I want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey I mentioned at the top of the hour. The survey should be appearing on your screen, and we ask that you consider completing it to let us know your thoughts. Your input directly affects future webcasts, and we use it to improve future webcasts, so I hope you do take time to fill out the survey. If you don't see the evaluation survey on your screen, please turn off your pop-up blockers. Great. Let's get to some questions now. Mark, how should one layer their clothing while wearing Dickies FR garments? Does it matter what is worn underneath that protective clothing?
Good question. Layering is a good way to bump up the protection level of your garments. For example, if you're wearing an arc-rated shirt and pant and you need to get to a higher level, putting on an arc-rated coverall, FR coverall over top of that will boost your number. The key thing to remember, though, is you really don't know what the protection level is. You don't know how much higher protection unless that combination of fabrics has been tested together. So it's going to do some good to layer up. It's going to increase the value, probably more than you think, but unless it's been tested, you really don't know the number. Now, in terms of what you wear underneath, we're talking about wearing, for example, a T-shirt underneath a coverall or a regular FR shirt. Those help, and those do improve the protection value. Again, you don't know how much unless it's been tested, but the key thing to remember is that underlayer has to be either FR or a natural fiber, cotton, 100% cotton, or wool, or something such as that. Can't be anything that has the potential to melt. You don't want anything with polyester, acetates, nylons, things that aren't FR and have the potential to melt, those synthetic fabrics. Those are not good to wear under FR. That's a problem if you wear those kind of things underneath.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ed, I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about OSHA fines and litigation as it pertains to FR.
Okay, yes. And I saw the question there, and talking about OSHA fines, it really depends on the particular, each individual inspection, what's happened. If it's just an inspection based on site-specific targeting, something like that, or you fall under some national emphasis program and they're doing the just general inspection as part of their overall wall-to-wall inspection, and they find a violation on not using the appropriate flame-retardant clothing or not done the assessment to determine what was the appropriate flame-retardant clothing, or not training them on how to use it properly, those type of things, Well, I suspect that you would see there that those type of violations would either be cited either as a or ones I've seen, and like I say, I've seen a good bit, and I think it's actually increased over the last several years where there's much more focused on these things. Because once again, it's an easy violation for the inspectors. They're familiar with the PPE standard. They know the different requirements there, and so this is it's just easy work for them. But if it's just part of a general inspection somehow, I think you're going to look either receiving a serious or other than serious violation. And the penalties, it used to be that the penalties for other than serious got a zero penalty. That doesn't occur very often anymore under the current administration. They've really been focusing on that. And here, depending on the degree of hazards, how they think most likely somebody could get injured, the severity of the injury, everything that, I think more than likely they're going to look this as a serious violation. So the maximum penalty there is going to be $7,000. Now the difference is, though, if you have a situation where you have either a complaint by an employee where as a result of an accident, or if you've had to call OSHA in because you've had a fatality or the current hospitalization of 3 or more employees under the record-keeping standard, which I will note right now that does change come January 1st, where you'll still have to report the fatalities within 8 hours. But if you have come January 1st, if you have a hospitalization of 1 employee, you have to report that within 24 hours. If you have an amputation, then that means a loss of a fingertip, as little as a loss of a fingertip, you will have to contact OSHA within 24 hours. Or if you have a loss of an eye, you're going to have to call OSHA within 24 hours. This is a new change to the record-keeping standard. But if they're doing coming based on the complaint, or if they call because you call them because somebody had got a serious injury, you have an arc flash injury or something, and they weren't wearing any flame retardant clothing, then more than likely they're going to be looking at this as a potential willful violation. And now we're talking about a penalty that could be as high as $70,000. And I have seen those where they cited employers for willful violations on not providing the right PPE or not providing any PPE when it was clearly necessary. So that I think you need to be aware of.
Okay, great, thank you. Mark, does Dickies FR garments do they have an ARC rating?
Yes, all the garments have an ARC rating. It's labeled on the garment itself. It's going to be, a number like, 8.5 calories per square centimeter or 10.2, whatever the number might be. They all have a rating, and that's on a label in the garment. They all of them also have a category listing that comes out of NFPA 70E, either a 1, 2, 3, or 4, and that gives you a protection level based on some of the tables in NFPA 70E. Category 1 being a minimum of 4 calorie rating, Category 2 being a minimum of 8, 3 a minimum of 25, and Category 4 being a minimum of 40. So they'll all have the actual calorie rating on a label, and they'll all also have one of those category ratings, 1, 2, 3, or 4.
All right, fantastic. Is there a difference between flame resistant and flame retardant? A few of the viewers seem to see them used interchangeably. Do they mean the same thing, or do they mean something different?
Well, actually they do mean something slightly different. They are used a lot in the industry interchangeably, but flame retardant are the chemicals that are added to the garments in a treated type, that are added to the fabrics in order to make them flame resistant. Likewise, in the Inherence, the fibers are made with flame retardant chemicals or properties in the fibers to make them flame resistant. So flame resistant is the word that really best describes what the products are, and that's what the standards call them. And then flame retardant are the chemicals or the processes that make them flame resistant. So that's how you distinguish between one and the other. But people tend to call them the same thing.
Okay, good. We had a couple questions that came in regarding combustible dust. What do you recommend in situations where someone might be working in a sawmill or perhaps around grain or sugar dust? Are FR garments a good idea in those kinds of situations?
Well, I know, Ed, you might be able to touch on this briefly, but I know OSHA has been involved with combustible dust a lot over the last number of years. They had a national emphasis program initiated to try and make people more aware of the potential issues and identify industries where there's potential problem. And, the primary thing to do with combustible dust is to either prevent it or clean it up so it's not a problem. That's the best thing to do. If there's a situation where you have exposure or the potential, and that you would find out during your hazard assessment, if you have that potential for a combustible dust explosion to actually happen, then wearing flame-resistant clothing would be a good idea, because it's going to be just like we mentioned earlier. If you're not wearing flame-resistant clothing, there is a combustible dust event, your clothes are going to catch on fire, and then you've got a problem, just like any flash fire. So I think the key is to do the hazard assessment, make sure that any of those employees that are potentially exposed to a combustible dust event would be in FR clothing. But, prevention, keeping it cleaned up, doing a hazard assessment, that should tell you whether it's all or just some of the employees might be in need of FR clothing as part of their PPE.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with Mark. I mean, OSHA looks at it. OSHA had proposed to do a combustible dust standard. That was kind of when the Obama administration came in and the new politicals came in at OSHA. My successor and Dr. Michaels out, they all talked about they were going to do a combustible dust standard, and I kept trying to tell them, well, it's really going to be economically infeasible for you to do it. You can't do one-size-fits-all standard. And I think they finally kind of realized that, and now it's just kind of sitting out there. So I don't think we'll see a combustible dust standard. What I would say here, and I think, Mark, you have to do the assessment, and that's one thing you're really going to have to look at. You got to do that. Now, it may mean that a particular job, within the maintenance department, I think there's certain things there you have to look at. What type of operations do you have? Do you have an operation where let's say you're utilizing oxygen, a lot of oxygen to do something. It's part of your process somehow or whatever, and that oxygen can get into the system, and when they're doing maintenance on those type of things, doing maintenance on the system themselves, they need to. And if there's the potential for oxygen being present, and you're hammering on stuff, or you're unloosening bolts that may cause sparks and stuff like that. You may have the situation there that yes, you may have a combustible dust, or you may have a combustion system there. You may have flammable liquids, other types of things that normally the employee would not be exposed to, but the maintenance people are. So those people, when they're performing certain work, may necessitate the work they're doing may necessitate the use of having and wearing flame retardant clothing. And it may be as much as just like changing valves out or something like that, where I've had that situation too. But you just need to be aware, that it may not be just the job. The overall job you might not see that. But if there are certain tasks within those jobs, particularly I think in maintenance, you're going to see that may necessitate the use of flame retardant clothing.
That's very true. And I would mention that there is an NFPA standard, NFPA 654, which deals with combustible dust, and there's some sections in there that talk about doing the assessment and where appropriate flame-resistant clothing may be suitable for those particular tasks.
Okay, great. We are running out of time, but I want to get one last question in. And this may be a long question, but as succinctly as you can. Talk a little bit more about the hazard assessment. Would the development of procedures meet the requirements for a hazard assessment, or can a hazard assessment just be as simple as a handwritten sheet, performed by the manager and signed and dated?
You can go online. I develop a lot of hazard assessments for PPE for clients, but you can just go in and Google it. Just put it in there, hazard assessment for PPE. and you're going to pull up different ones. You're going to pick up different ones that are done by companies, some recommendations from, I don't know if OSHA has one out there or not. But I would say the development of procedures in and of itself will not be considered the assessment. The assessment can be, though, could be, in most cases it is. It's a form that says, here's X department, what's the hazards, what's the hazard that necessitates PPE, and there are different ways, and you're looking at the, eye protection, head protection, hearing, respirators, all those type of things, and then you're going to, and across there you can put in there what's selected, what are you looking at. So, but I would have to say that this development of procedures would not, and clearly the development of procedures would not meet the certification requirement. The written certification requirement is very specific. You need a piece of paper that at the top says certification of hazard assessment for PPE. I don't know any other standard that tells you what the document has to be titled, but this one does. And then you have those 4 different things that we mentioned earlier that you have to be able to show when this was done, who did it, what was the facility, and even though the hazard assessment technically does not have to be in writing, it doesn't say anything in the standard about that. Why would you not do it? I mean, you want to be able to point to document. And the thing is, once you got it, you got it. Now, you need to monitor if your work site changes somehow and there's new hazards, safety and health hazards that may need PPE, then you're going to have to redo it. And so I don't think it's always we've done it once and that's okay. But depending on your operations too, I have a lot of clients that their operations are almost identical all around the country. And we develop a corporate hazard assessment for PPE that they send for each one of their facilities and have the facility manager or the safety person who's handling safety in that there do this determination and fill it out and make sure. So in that case, arguably, you may be able to have a kind of a standardized thing, a format that you can use at all your facilities. So.
Okay, great. Thank you for that response, Ed. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I apologize. We didn't get to everyone's questions. There were a lot that came in, but all of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded on to today's speakers. Once again, I hope you take the time to fill out the evaluation survey on your screen, give us your feedback. And with that, that ends today's Safety and Health webcast. I'd like to thank Ed, Mark, Dickies, and everyone who listened in. Thank you, and have a great day.